Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our session of the Afros and Audios Conference. Today, we'll be talking about the benefits of collaboration. My name is Nyemade Boiwu, or That African Butterfly, as I'm known on social media. And I have the podcast Bold, Black, and Addicted to Bravo, as well as What's on Your Mind. And I have two other collaborators, podcasters with me today to talk about their podcast as well. I'll start with Genie.
Hi, I'm Genie Dawkins. I am the host of the Parenting Cipher podcast that is dedicated to parents with special needs children who are hyper focused on making sure that their child is successful in school and in life.
Thank you. And Shamiko?
Hi, my name is Shamiko Reid. I am the host of the Discussion Room podcast, an extension of Daaamn Daddy.com, where daddy issues drive discussions. And I talk to people about their relationship or lack thereof with their father or father figures and how it impacts who they are and how they show up in the world today.
Awesome. And as I mentioned, I do Bold, Black, and Addicted to Bravo. It's a podcast where I talk with other people who just love Bravo and talking about different life things, but through the lens of our Bravo shows, because it's kind of unifying without having to talk about our specific life things. And also What's on Your Mind, where I talk to different people about mental health, from mental health professionals to advocates. And we just talk about different things related to our mental health and getting by day to day. But I'm sure, as you can imagine, from the way we each described our podcast, we can't do it alone. All of us need guests or contributing podcasters to collaborate with us, which is how we came up with the topic for this week, for this session, which is the benefits of collaboration. Oftentimes people think that partnering up or working with somebody who's in the same field as you brings the competition and blah, blah, blah. And it can, if that's your mentality, or it can bring a shared audience for you, which is what we think and why we gather together to have this conversation. So to start off, what we're going to do is we're just going to go through a few questions. The first thing we're going to talk about, which is the main part, is the benefits of collaboration. Because of course, with everything, there's benefits and pitfalls, and we'll get into some of those. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our session of the Afros and Audios Conference. Today, we'll be talking about the benefits of collaboration. My name is Nyemade Boiwu, or That African Butterfly, as I'm known on social media. And I have the podcast Bold, Black, and Addicted to Bravo, as well as What's on Your Mind. And I have two other collaborators, podcasters with me today to talk about their podcast as well. I'll start with Genie.
Hi, I'm Genie Dawkins. I am the host of the Parenting Cipher podcast that is dedicated to parents with special needs children who are hyper focused on making sure that their child is successful in school and in life.
Thank you. And Shamiko?
Hi, my name is Shamiko Reid. I am the host of the Discussion Room podcast, an extension of Daaamn Daddy.com, where daddy issues drive discussions. And I talk to people about their relationship or lack thereof with their father or father figures and how it impacts who they are and how they show up in the world today.
Awesome. And as I mentioned, I do Bold, Black, and Addicted to Bravo. It's a podcast where I talk with other people who just love Bravo and talking about different life things, but through the lens of our Bravo shows, because it's kind of unifying without having to talk about our specific life things. And also What's on Your Mind, where I talk to different people about mental health, from mental health professionals to advocates. And we just talk about different things related to our mental health and getting by day to day. But I'm sure, as you can imagine, from the way we each described our podcast, we can't do it alone. All of us need guests or contributing podcasters to collaborate with us, which is how we came up with the topic for this week, for this session, which is the benefits of collaboration. Oftentimes people think that partnering up or working with somebody who's in the same field as you brings the competition and blah, blah, blah. And it can, if that's your mentality, or it can bring a shared audience for you, which is what we think and why we gathered together to have this conversation. So to start off, what we're going to do is we're just going to go through a few questions. The first thing we're going to talk about, which is the main part, is the benefits of collaboration. Because of course, with everything, there's benefits and pitfalls, and we'll get into some of those. But first, we're going to start with the benefits of collaboration. The first question, I'll do it for Genie. What are the benefits of collaborating with another podcast? Like, how will it help the audience grow or influence your show's credibility?
So, as far as how does it benefit your show? So think about it like this. So I have listeners, let's say I have 1,000 downloads a month, and Shamiko has 5,000 downloads a month, right? And I do a collaboration with her. She's on my show, I'm on her show. We're both gaining visibility. So we're having listeners hear our show that normally they wouldn't. Like, I am hyper focused. I'm with parents with special needs kids. Shamiko's talking about people who want to discuss like their relationships with their dad. However, they are intersecting at some point. You may know someone has a child with special needs. You may have a child with special needs, but that's not what you're focused on at the moment. You want to listen to Shamiko's podcast. But if I'm on her show, then there's a pivot, right? So you get to gain an audience that normally you probably would never have exposure to. As far as credibility, so you can have your podcast, you're over there by yourself, but what do they say? You know, you fly faster as a group. So if I'm on Shamiko's podcast, if I'm on someone else's podcast, what ends up happening is not only am I building audience, but I'm building my credibility as far as being an authority when it comes to special education. Versus before, it's just like I'm by myself and I'm talking. Who are you? Like, what are you on? I don't see you anywhere. But the more shows you're on, it influences your Google. So if I was to go in and say Genie Dawkins, anytime my name is mentioned by another person's podcast as being a guest, my reach becomes further as well as my credibility versus I'm just sitting here by myself on a mic and you're like, well, who are you? Like, what makes you special? But credibility is built by how far your reach is. When someone Googles you, you know what that song by Tiana Taylor, Google me, baby. Someone Googles your name and you pop up all over the place. It's like, oh, they're real. I think the other question is how does it improve the quality or diversity?
Yeah, I was going to take that one to Shamiko.
Okay, go ahead.
And Shamiko, what are your thoughts on like the benefits of collaboration? Like, how would it improve the quality or diversity of your content?
So to expand on what Genie was sharing, if my podcast is mostly people sharing how their childhood influences their adulthood, and her podcast is mostly a resource for parents. If I have somebody who was a special needs child share about what they wish their parents had done differently, and then I have Genie as my follow-up guest sharing how people can advocate for their children now, the reach that I have, or the audience or the listeners who might be attracted to one guest might additionally listen to the episode with Genie because they saw how it impacted my previous guest to be a child with special needs and to go through the school system and to feel like their parents could have done more. And so maybe my listener is experiencing that now. They might be raising a special needs child, or they might be listening and they have a friend who is. And then they know that Genie is going to be my next guest. And so now they want to listen to her episode to see, you know, what they can do as well and how that can help them. So when you have multiple guests and you reach out to other people, you diversify your audience and your listeners and the people you attract. So my podcast is mostly about people's past, but I had a guest who was who focused on dads and their adult daughters. And so I enjoyed listening to that podcast and I reached out to them. And we were able to do a swap. And I was a guest on their show and they were a guest on mine.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you for sharing that. So going into the next question, which is what are some creative ways to collaborate with other podcasts? And I think your answer is a wonderful transition into that question. And I'll answer this one, or at least I'll start answering it, which is you mentioned something I love doing, which is like a two-parter, right? Where you invite someone on and you have it be a multiple part. I particularly love doing it multiple on each platforms. So maybe we do part one on my platform and part two on their platform. It gives them a reason to be into both and then to follow that conversation. Usually I'll say whoever has a larger audience should start. And then the second part should be with the other person just to bring in those viewers. But that's one of my favorite ways to do collaborations. And I also love a good group collaboration. I always love getting people together for group discussions. I just think they're interesting and they're fun and it makes people learn other people. I've found out about so many new people to follow because of those types of collaborations. What are some creative ways that either of you have collaborated?
Well, I did a show with someone where we split it. She started on her episode, and then I continued on my episode. Basically, it's the only kind of collaboration I've done so far with podcasters.
One of my friends who has a podcast, we collaborated to do a live event. So it wasn't recorded because we had people share a lot of personal information and really some raw and vulnerable things about themselves. And since they were not asked in advance to like share that for the platform, we had what she proposed to do was a spotless Father's Day brunch. And so we invited people to meet us at a restaurant. Everyone paid for their own stuff. And we just talked about different things. She bought some prompts because she works in the mental health field. And I've done some work in that space, but not to the same extent that she has. So that was one way we did a collaboration. And we were able to talk about that event on each of our platforms, both leading up to and following it. And it was a nice way to get a lot of new listeners because not everyone who came to the event was familiar with either one of our shows. Some people just discovered it through the event hosting platform and they were like, this looks like something I need to be at. And so once they got to meet us and hear what we had to share and really feel good about, you know, not being recorded without their permission at the event, it gave them incentive to listen to our show and to each show separately and share that with other people.
Yeah, that's excellent. Now, how do you find other podcasts that are a good fit for your collaboration?
So it depends. So it depends on what you're looking for. So I would say the first thing is you need to identify what is your secret sauce. So outside of your podcast, when you are going to someone else's show, what else do you want to talk about? Like that's one of the things that I do. So yes, I talk about special needs parenting, but I also talk about building a team around your child, which is really generalized. That's just for parents, period, not just special needs kids. So one of the things that I do is I will look and see what other podcasts are talking about parenting outside of special education. I also use my community. That is like one of my main things is my community, which is women of color group and in podcasting. And there's always plenty of people there that are willing to collaborate because we all are trying to build each other's reach, right? But then I also do cold, which means I don't know you, but I heard you. Like Shamiko said, I heard you, and I would just love to have you on my show. And when I do that, I literally send out emails once I get their information and I introduce myself. And if I want to be on their podcast, I tell them what's the topic I'm discussing, and I make sure that it's in alignment with what they're talking about. And it's vice versa. When someone wants to be on my podcast, if you want to be on my podcast and you want to talk about, let's say, for instance, you want to talk about it's the Christmas season and you have a Christmas show, okay, well, fine, but be specific. Like how did that, you want to talk about kids who have fear of anxiety around Christmas, most definitely come on my show. It has to be in alignment, or it has to be a topic that I can see my audience wanting. So I would say whenever you want to collaborate with someone who's outside of your genre, pay attention to how you can fit in. So when you pitch them, you want to be specific. You don't want them to overthink it. You don't really want them to say, oh no, because they assume that you talk about one thing when really, as people, we could talk about all the things. So tell them what you want to talk about. And when you invite them on the show, once again, tell them what you want them to talk about. You have a lawyer. We just saw someone who has a pop lawyer. She's pop culture. She's a lawyer. Why would I want her on my show? If I say, hey, can you be on my show? She's going to say no. It has nothing to do with special education. But if I was to say, hey, I saw your show. In this show, you were talking about special needs kids, parents who have them on social media. And I want to know how can they ensure that their children their legal paperwork and everything is safeguarded. Now she's more likely to say yes. Because I told her exactly what I want her on and how it crossed over to support my audience. So I will always say when collaboration, don't just think about, first of all, don't pigeonhole yourself, right? If you want to be on somebody's show, see what they're talking about and can you talk about anything that falls under that umbrella? And the same things when you want people on your show, sometimes people can't see it, but you can. And if you can see it, tell them what you see so that you'll get that yes instead of maybe or that no. And even if they say maybe, it's cool. You might have to push a little bit further, but be clear with your ask.
Yes, that's such good. Like, I don't even know what more there is to say besides that. Like, that's such good advice, both as someone who is trying to get guests onto their podcast, and for those of you who are trying to be guests onto podcasts. Like, finding that connection is so huge. And we talked about collaborating with people in the same genre, but cross-genre collaboration is a good for growth as well. And Jeannie just gave some great suggestions on how you can make that cross collaboration happen while still staying true to your goals and your task. I know for me as well, because with Bold Black and Addicted to Bravo, I tried to connect with other podcasts, but I also want to connect with the regular folks, right? Like, that's my main thing is, as someone who watches and loves television, I always have an opinion, and sometimes I just want to say it. And I find that people enjoy having like just a platform just to get their opinions out besides just yelling at the TV. So for me, also find guests by going through the comment sections of like Bravo, especially for my Bravo one, I'll go through the comment sections of like Bravo things that have happened. And if someone has like a particularly like well thought out comment or something where I can tell they've been thinking or they're good at expressing their thoughts, I'll reach out to them in a DM and say, hey, I have this podcast. Do you want to be a guest? And then same thing with my mental health one. That one's almost a little easier to find because you're just reaching out. For me, for the most part, I'm reaching out to mental health specialists and the wide variety of topics. So that makes it easier. But even when I want to reach out to your average man, it's still a matter, like she said, of saying like how and why I'm reaching out to them. Because what's on your mind is everything, right? Like, we can talk about anything under the subject of mental health and your mind. So like, if I want to reach out to someone outside of the mental health field, but they have something that I want to know, like, hi, how does this impact your mental health dealing with this particular thing? It's just a matter of tying it back in, like she said. And so one last benefit that we're going to talk about, which I know a lot of people also think about, is the financial benefits of collaboration. Many of us are also still on we do it for the love of podcasting, but there are people who are monetizing, which is awesome. But what are some financial benefits to collaboration? Is there like shared sponsorships or joint merchandising sales that people are able to get? Shamiko, would you like to speak on that at all?
I don't currently monetize my podcast, so I'm not able to speak to that from a personal perspective. However, I participate in a lot of communities and organizations where that conversation takes place often. One person I would advise anyone who is listening to this session be familiar with is Danielle Desir, who started the Women of Color Podcasting community, because about a year ago, she also started the Grant for Creators newsletter. Mm-hmm. And I was able to secure a sponsorship for my podcast, a grant sponsorship for my podcast awesome. From her advisement. So I applied for a grant and I was granted that grant because of her encouragement and just different things like that. So that's one way when you collaborate with someone, they don't necessarily have to be a guest on your show. Getting into communities where people are having conversations about different levels of podcasting. I'm one of those people, like I said, my podcast is an extension of my blog. I started blogging about daddy issues because I did not fit the narrative of what society said someone with daddy issues looked like or walked through life like. Mm-hmm. And so I started to unpack that. And I had a marketing coach who was like, you need better titles. And one title that she kept proposing turned out to be the title of my first podcast where I interviewed her. So getting to collaborate with others doesn't necessarily always look like having them as a guest. Ways to make money with people does not always look like having them as a guest or being a guest. It can be people who create products together. Some people create workshops together. They might have a podcast that are finance-based or travel-based or relationship-based, and they create a book. It's like, hey, my listeners like this thing that I said on your show, and your listeners like this thing that you said on my show. So let's put those things together in a book and sell it. And they sell it for a limited time, or they merchandise things at conferences. You talked about how to collaborate with people or meet people to collaborate with. I don't exclusively collaborate with other podcasters, but many of my guests have been people I met through community, either through that marketing program, through the Black Podcasters Association, or just speaking at other events. I spoke at an event in Charlotte in 2019, and I was able to get a guest, actually 3 guests from who are other speakers there. So one of them had a podcast, the other one did not, but the one who didn't have a podcast has an organization that supports people through stillborn and infant loss. And I had unfortunately, several people close to me who experienced that, and I was able to send them her way. So collaboration doesn't always have to look like being a guest or featuring a guest, and it can look like supporting another person's business by sending people their way. Like, hey, this person was a guest on my podcast. They have a business that meets your current needs. This is someone you should connect with.
Yes, that's an excellent point. And there are different ways to collaborate and different forms of collaboration. I love all of that. Genie, is there anything that we missed that you want to add to that point?
So I wanted to add, so one of the things as, you know, a podcaster, when you are collaborating with someone is, what is your ask? Is your ask, hey, come listen to my podcast? Is your ask to buy my book? Is your ask for that particular podcast at that time, you are creating, I think at one point I had a course, right? So what is your entry point? You know, at that end, it could be something simple as, you know, if you enjoy this conversation, I created a gift for let's say Shamiko's listeners. Like, I enjoy being on this podcast. I love her audience. You know, I'm giving away this freebie that leads to the next thing. So it's once again leveraging the visibility on someone else's platform that can lead to the monetary or the financial or the listenership. But when you are on someone else's podcast, before you get on there, ask yourself, what is it that you want someone to do? Like, we always talk about call to action. Do you want someone to buy your book? Do you want someone to buy your coloring book? Do you want someone to come check out your podcast? Whatever that is, it can lead to the finances, depending on how you're growing. You know, initially it could just be you just want listeners, but that listener, once they get on your podcast and you are selling something, that can lead to your monetary piece. You know, if you're on that podcast and you have a cute hat on and you made that hat, Shamiko made this, mention it. You know, it doesn't have to be a big ask. It doesn't have to be a big deal. For my introverts who do not feel salesy, we feel like that's inauthentic. It doesn't have to be inauthentic. It's just part of a conversation because, you know, all of us, we're walking around with so-and-so's shoes on, so-and-so's jewelry on, and we're real quick to say, I got this from Macy's. I got this from this sister over here in the market, really quick. Take that thought, same thing for yourself. Hey, if you like my content and you enjoyed me today, please check me out. And because I love so-and-so's listeners, I've created this freebie. The other part I want to say is this. Always remember, sometimes it's not the money, it's the access. And you get people on that newsletter. When you're ready to monetize, you already have your audience. So it could be that simple. It doesn't have to be the immediate cash in your hand.
Mm-hmm. I want to expand on a point that Genie made in terms of someone seeing something. I interviewed somebody one time, and I used to have a painting behind me whenever I did my show. And they asked me, about the painting, and I did it. And so it's like, you know, I made that painting, and it was like, oh, it really captured my eye the whole time. So it's like, you should know before reaching out to someone and collaborating how you can make it a mutually beneficial experience. Mm-hmm. Like Genie said, getting the access, getting people on your newsletter so that you can convert them into buyers when you have something to sell, or when you are promoting an event that you want them to attend, or even if you want them to buy your Afros and audio tickets through you with your code, so you can get that. Right. You know, you need to build the relationships that way, but also it gives you the opportunity to just expand. Like, you know, maybe you are someone who has a craft-based podcast or something that's unrelated to your hobby. Like, I painted that, but that wasn't something I was doing in the moment or trying to promote. And they were like, can you make something for me? That's one way to make money without even trying. It's just like, you know, think about the ways. I know a lot of people keep merch. They wear their shirts or have a mug. They keep their merch in their videos if they have a video-based podcast. And then people will say, hey, how can I support you? Oh, I have a Patreon. You can buy from me. Or when people do audience swaps or feature, they might have a freebie, but they might also have a product that they sell and you don't have a product that you sell yet, and they give you an affiliate code. So anybody from your audience that buys their product after listening to your episode with them as a guest, you get a percentage back through your affiliate code if they buy through your link. So there are lots of ways to make money through collaboration, and you always need to think about how things are mutually beneficial when you approach someone. But just also don't feel intimidated if you are not in a place where you sell yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's so many different ways to collaborate, so many different ways to bring in funding and sponsorship. And like you said, it could be something as simple as something being behind you that somebody notices. You just never really know. When we talk about the collaboration, though, let's talk a little bit more about some etiquette, right? So we've sort of decided that we want to collab and we want to have some guests on, but what's the best way to approach somebody for a collaboration, but especially so it doesn't make you seem like you're coming across self-serving? I think people worry about that a little bit. What's a good way to approach someone in a way that says, hey, I'm doing this for our mutual benefit?
I focus on the people I'm serving. That's one of the main things I do is always focus on the people I'm serving. And even when I forgot to mention this, like I find people on Instagram and I DM them. And I also on Twitter, what I do is I star people. So I create a list, like my hot list of people that I want to interview at some point, and I start following them. So then I just DM them. But once again, I'm really clear on how it's benefiting my audience, not so much me, as well as do I mention, hey, people get to know you? No, not really. Because when I'm DMing people like that, that means that I've identified you are already doing it. You're already serving people. The only thing I'm doing is saying, hey, I'm being specific. I'm talking to parents of color. You don't have a lot of podcasts where they're that hyper niched, where it's parents of color with education. So I just focus on who I'm serving. If I was to focus on myself, to be honest, I probably wouldn't ask anybody for anything.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's something that's great to definitely keep in mind while you're trying to reach out to someone. Shamiko, what are some things that you have found that you should avoid while trying to collaborate?
Avoid leaving things too open-ended. So my degree, my background is what I want to say. My degree is in business management. And so I love business communications. It's one of my favorite classes. So emails are my thing. I love to send a good structured email. I enjoy doing that. I have a lot of success with that. However, I've had a lot of changes in my life in the past couple of years, so I don't have the same freedom to record that I once had. And so when people ask me when am I available, I'll send out the Calendly link, but it's like very limited compared to what it used to be, or the hours may not coincide with the person I presented it to. And so when they say, okay, when did you have in mind? Be specific, give them a specific window, and let them know when you want to hear back from them. Because I might send someone my Calendly link and they don't see anything that works for them there. And I'll say, if you don't see anything that works for you there, propose an alternative date. And sometimes they don't do that. So, I mean, it's good to give them that option, but sometimes having that option is a deterrent. Like, oh, well, I'll get back to you when I get back to you. So definitely when you are looking to collaborate with someone, be specific about when your availability is. And honestly, if you know that you're not going to have the availability to collab in a short window or a close period of time, you might want to wait until you have some clarity around when you are available to collaborate before reaching out to people, because it might be a missed opportunity. Also, don't be afraid to circle back. The one that I was sharing earlier with the person who they did a podcast with their dad called Girl Talk with Pops. I followed up like 3 months later, and that was one of the best collaborations because I hadn't heard back from them, but I was an avid listener of their show. So I knew that they were still putting out episodes. And I just followed up, and they were like, oh, I'm so glad that you followed up. I was looking for this email. And it genuinely was one of the best collaborations that I've ever experienced. They sent me a gift, and I was like, wow, should I be doing that? So, you learn things when you collaborate with other people as well.
That's a huge point. You definitely do learn a lot. But I love your point about not leaving things too open-ended or too open-ended. That is one of the biggest things I learned when I first started doing Bold, Black, and Addicted to Bravo. Because originally, like with What's on Your Mind and my other series and things, it was always just me reaching out to one person. So I reach out to them, we figure out our schedules. Bold, Black, and Addicted to Bravo is a group usually. I usually have like 4 or more people. 4 plus me, so 3 or more people. And in the beginning, I thought, okay, so the best way to schedule this is to just leave it open, like let them tell me when they're available, and then I'll figure out all of our schedules. That is not the best idea. That is only a great idea if you have all the time in the world to go through all of that. So what I have learned is to figure out my availability and say, here's when I'm recording this episode on this topic here. And then I have like a group that I send it to, like, if you're able to join me, like, let me know, like first 4 or whatever. So depending on how your podcast is structured, figuring that out is so time saving, and don't be afraid to limit that time. I used to feel like, oh no, if I don't have all of this availability, they'll say no, and then we won't get to work together. But like sometimes no isn't always a no forever. Sometimes it's just a not right now, and that's okay. Letting them know like, hey, you can circle back. We'll be doing other topics later. Come back is so much better for them and for you. You're not stressing yourself out trying to make something work in your schedule that doesn't work, because at the end of the day, you do still want this to be an enjoyable experience. Most of us didn't start podcasting because we hated it. We started it because we loved it. We loved the topic. We wanted to help. We wanted to let people know or just have an area to discuss stuff. So I always try to make sure it stays something that's enjoyable for me as much as possible. And a big key in that is, decreasing the stress. Something that's a huge stress reliever is sharing responsibilities, which is something that I had to work on as well. A little bit of a control freak, but I have learned the art of sharing responsibility and how it helps, and how you don't have to feel like, because part of it is I would feel like, oh, I'm slacking off. I like invited them and now I'm asking them to do this or do that. But sharing responsibility helps you both out. Jeannie, can you speak a little bit more about that? Like some best ways to share responsibilities when collaborating?
So, piggyback on what you're saying, I am a control freak because I know how I want it to be done. But one of the best ways to do it is upfront ask. So ask questions. I don't edit. Like I'm learning to edit, but that's not my superpower. The after product, so like the show notes, like that's my thing. Like, first of all, identify your strength, and then identify what is it that's not your strength, and ask them like, this is not necessarily my thing. Do you do your own edits? Would you be interested in editing? Don't try to take it all upon yourself, which we all try to do to some extent, because you're asking someone to do something, so you're kind of like, oh, I asked you a favor, because that's what you're thinking. I asked you a favor and now I'm asking you to do work. But no, it is mutually beneficial. And the last thing that you want is editing is not your strength. And you told this person that you can do it all. And then they're listening to the podcast like, what is this mess? Because you wasn't vulnerable, right? You want to do all the things, or you're out here paying people to edit the podcast and you're not even paying people to edit your own stuff. So just be honest, have that conversation, because they might be editing their own stuff. They may have someone who's willing to edit it, but just be really clear, be vulnerable, because no one wants to say they can't do things. But that is like the best thing. Identify what you're good at and what's easy for you. And if whatever's not, ask them, so what's your thing? Because I just was in a group and we just identified what were our strengths and what were our weaknesses. And then everybody was able to kind of like divvy up the work.
I love that. And Shamiko, when we, talk about collaborating and sharing responsibilities, we all wish it was kumbaya all the time, but we know it's not. Sometimes disagreements come up. How do you deal with that? Or how should disagreements or creative differences be dealt with when collaborating?
I think it depends on where the disagreement lies. So I learned this the hard way. Somebody asked me to send them the video, and I did, and they shared it on their YouTube page, and it got all of these likes, and I was not able to capitalize that, all those views for my own page. So I wouldn't do that again, but I didn't hold that against that person because it's just not something I was prepared for at that time. If that was something that happened now and someone requested that and I would tell them, no, I'm not going to be able to share the raw footage with you, and that was a disagreement, then it just would be a conversation like, hey, this is why I don't do that. You are more than welcome to share the link once I release it, and just try to be as peaceful as possible about it, as logical as possible, because it's like I said, it depends on where the disagreement lies. If somebody has said something in the interview that they want me to take out, if it's something that I think will be valuable to my audience, I might propose that to them. Hey, I know that you're not comfortable with this statement. Here's why I think it would be good for the people who will hear it. I'll let you listen to it in its entirety in the context of the conversation we had to see if you're still uncomfortable. If you are, I'll respect that, but I really think you should give it another chance. That's something that it takes a conversation. It takes a shift in perspective maybe, but it really just depends on where the disagreement lies, because those two things are different scenarios. You wanting ownership of the content that I created for my platform versus you being uncomfortable with something you said. I never edited. Before getting in certain communities, I didn't edit. So whatever you said, you said. You need to stand on that. The whole unedited version is going on YouTube. It's going on Spotify, all of that. Whatever you said, be comfortable with what you said, because I didn't know how to edit. I had no interest in editing. I had no experience with it, and it was also the type of conversations we were having. I wanted to keep the integrity of the conversation whole. I've never had anybody ask me to take anything down, so I'm fortunate in that way. But just envisioning the type of things that could occur, those are the ways I would handle it. This is why I'm not doing that, or this is why I think you should change your mind about that. And if it's something where I agree and they said something that would be tarnishing their reputation, or something that would be, harmful to them as a person to have out there, I absolutely would remove that. But I talk to guests about very personal things all the time. I've had more than one guest talk about instances of childhood sexual assault. So there are definitely sensitive conversations that I have with people, and I pride myself on the fact that no one has ever asked me to take anything down or has felt taken advantage of when being vulnerable and sharing their stories.
And that's great. And what you said is so key: communication, right? Like with any type of relationship out there, whether it's podcast collaboration, parents, kids, relationship, communication is like the biggest way to get through differences. I know that I personally always try to go from an intent. Like I view my reactions to people's stuff is I try to think of where their intent is, right? Because nobody's perfect and we screw up. I screw up frequently, but rarely out of malice and with ill intent. I just sort of like mess it up, or I didn't realize something. And I'm lucky enough to have people who give me grace around those moments to understand, like, okay, she's not just trying to be a pain. So I try to extend that same grace to other people and figure out, like, where's the intent? Because like you said, a lot of times if you have that communication and you talk about it, you can figure out what the actual thing is, not just what their reaction is or what the effect was. You can figure out what the cause is and figure out where they were trying to get. So I think that that's hugely important. Genie, what about you?
I was going to say a collaborative agreement.
Mm.
Is important. I think, in this conversation, it's important that when I have guests on my show, I have them sign a release. And it's the same thing when I'm collaborating with people. We should both not just, I want you to sign my release. Like, do you have a release? Like, as like everyone does it. Do you have a release that you would like me to sign? But even with the collaborative agreement, that's a different document. But hash out, like we're all saying right now, like hash out who's doing what's happening, have it signed. Like Shamiko said, you might not want something, like I want to have the ability to tell you, I want you to edit A, B, C, and D, right? It's unfair that we don't talk about it. And then all of a sudden I want Shamiko to edit something. And that's not the platform. That's not how she's operating. But if we have a collaborative agreement and Shamiko tells me, like I told Shamiko what I want, let's be clear. I want to be able to have the authority to tell you, I want you to edit something. Shamiko's going to say like, well, look, that's not actually how my show goes. So we have that understanding going in versus on the back end. Now I have all of these things that I want Shamiko to do or not do. And that's not something that we talked about. So always think of like a collaborative agreement, something simple, you hash out who's doing what, editing, sharing, all of those things. So on the back end, when we finish our collaboration, I don't feel salty. Not saying that, anyone does. You have regrets, right? Or they feel some kind of way with me and they don't ever want to be on my show again. So just really think about everything that we've said at this point and put it in agreement. Period.
That's huge. Yeah. Having it in writing for especially anything you do freelancing or on the side, I've learned, whether you're writing, blogging, podcasting, like if you can put it in an agreement, that's probably for the best.
Repurposing is big right now.
And it could also preserve any relationships that are in the infancy. Like Genie says, you might cold reach out to people, or I've emailed people and DM people, or I've had people reach out to me just in the comments, like, I would love to be on your show. I'm like, I don't know you. I typically like to get to know somebody in person first. But when you have that agreement, that's something, again, I learned in community. It's not something that I started out doing. But it helps preserve and map out how you're going to promote the show. Like I said, I talk about sensitive things, and they might want to get it off their chest, but they don't want everybody that they know to know that they let it off their chest. And so it's like, hey, in our agreement, you have to promote at least 3 times on social media, or, it has to be in one of your newsletters after it's released. Whatever we agreed on in advance, because a lot of people who are independent podcasters feel hurt. They feel personally hurt if they go through the effort to put together the show, they've edited it or paid someone to edit their show, and they've made all the graphics themselves, and they've given the person that they interviewed or collaborated with the materials, like, hey, this is the picture you gave me of you to use. This is what I've done with it. Here's the show notes. Can you share this with your community? And they're like, hey, no, that doesn't align with my, or I'm no longer doing those things. Or, yes, I agree that you could record me saying these things, but now this personal thing has happened over here, and I don't really want these people in my life to know that I shared that thing. No, you agree to do this. And it's like, you can put it on your Facebook and block those people. That's the thing. That's the option. So it does help protect you. It helps protect you and keep the integrity of their relationship intact.
Yeah. And a great point that you mentioned, I mentioned it, and I think Genie did too, is that we reach out sometimes in the comment section or through what we see online to get collaborators. But we don't know those people. So wondering, what their trust level worthiness is, and if they'll go through, having that written document is a huge way to make sure that you are protected. So at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're protected. Is there anything else that either of you do to make sure that your collaborators are trustworthy?
So
I typically,
again, I'm gonna go back. We talked about authority, right? We talked about authority. Unless I'm inviting a parent on my show, right? That's personal. Like, that is not like I'm bringing you on as an authority of something. So what I do is I vet people. I use Google, like I just said. I use Google, but the other thing is I also use social media. So with that being said, because of my show is for parents with special needs kids, but it's also parents of color. I'm really clear. So I have people pitch me all the time, and I'll be honest, everyone's not Black. I have white people pitching me, and I'm like, well, who are you? So I'm all in. I'm on their social media. I'm looking at their posts. I'm looking at their comments in other places, because sometimes how you want to present yourself and who you really are, they're not the same. So that's one of the things that I do to make sure that the people on my show are real. People who listen to my show, they trust me. So that's my integrity on the line. So for me to bring someone who's not Black on my show, and they're over here in the comments over here on TikTok and they have racist videos, like that's not going to work for me. So I always do a little bit of like background check. If they're authors, I kind of like preview that. If it's a doctor, I'm in their comments a little bit. I'm checking out their content, and making sure that they are an authority, not just someone who decided, like, I'm just going to make some type of video when I'm bringing you on my show as authority. So the one thing with my show is, who are the people that are serving your child? So doctors, people in education, therapists. So I can't just bring somebody on here because you say you're a therapist and I didn't even check to see if you were really a therapist. So that's one of the things I always make sure that if it's not something like personal, like you coming on my show to tell a story. I had someone pitch me when my first season, and she pitched me because she said that she wanted to talk about her child and finding a private school for her child. First, I was like, man, who are you? Because she has a podcast, but like, you pitching me, like, But I went and did my homework. I was impressed. We did a collab. It was awesome. But I am really clear, everyone's not going to be on my show. So you always want to do a little bit of homework, just to make sure that that person is aligned with who you are as a person. Because if you have someone on your show and they're not, and we already know how people are. So, they're all over the place digging around, and they'll find that one time that person made a crazy comment, and next thing you know, they're in your DMs on your podcast.
Been there.
Right.
Yeah, and that's such a great point, because I've gone down that road where it wasn't for a podcast episode, it was an IG live, and I interviewed the person, and then all of a sudden I got all of these DMs like, did you know this one time they said this? I was like, oh my goodness. But that's something important to keep an eye on, because you have to protect your brand. So you have to know, and just because someone says something that's the opposite doesn't mean that you don't automatically can't work with them. It just means that you have to know that you're going into it working with them, and those questions could arise, and you have to know how you want to handle them and how you want to answer them. And just don't go in blind. One of the joys of working with different people, of course, is like, you can talk to people from all over. That's what I love about podcasting, right? We don't have to be right next to each other, especially in this very virtual age. You can talk to people from wherever. But one of the downfalls of that is that when they're from wherever, there's also time zone differences and location differences and weather, and those can be some challenges sometimes. So Sumiko, like how do you navigate like just some common challenges that come up when you're doing a collaboration podcast?
One person I interviewed was in Rome at the time. So that was a huge time difference. And it made it challenging to set a time and a date. But I think primarily the people I collaborate with, I meet them in person. So I have some type of familiarity with them, whether I meet them at a conference or an event or just someplace I'm volunteering. I kind of get to know them for myself first. And when we connect, it's important to specify what time zone, because just because we met in New York doesn't mean that you're recording from New York and I'm recording from, we're not on the same time zone. Being open about that. Being open about, hey, the person who's in Rome told me that they were going to be in Rome and it was going to make it challenging, and could I accommodate? Or, they were not aware that I was going to do video. So they were a little bit caught off guard by that, but that just showed a lack of communication on my part, because I assumed, because I was familiar with them, that they were also equally familiar with me and that I did primarily video-based things. When you are collaborating with someone who has those type of challenges, be patient and be open. The same way like before, don't leave things too open-ended. Hey, if you're going to be out of the country and that's going to be inconvenience, we can reschedule for X date at X time. And I think that's a good way to handle it. Just knowing your limitations, because just because they are willing to be up at 2:00 in the morning doesn't mean you want to interview somebody who has 2:00 in the morning brain. It's a very different beast.
Yeah, that time zone one is a major one. Even within the US, trying to do arranging lives and things with people on the West Coast versus the East Coast, and what do you put on the flyers? And I know like last year for World Refugee Day, for a week, I was interviewing people who had been refugees, and that required a lot of international, and it was wild, the time differences. But it's nice also that you can post it within your time genre so your audience can watch. So it's challenging, but it's fun. And we've talked about a lot of really great things and a lot of wonderful benefits of collaborating. And we always wish that when we reach out to somebody that it's going to be field of roses, everything will go great. It'll be a wonderful collaborative effort. It isn't always. Sometimes you don't agree on everything, which we talked about. Having that agreement is a great way to bypass that. Having that wonderful open communication is a great way to bypass that and to get through that. But even with all of those best efforts, sometimes it just wasn't meant to be. Like love, sometimes it's just not enough. And so sometimes your podcast collaboration falls through, or there's a falling out between the two people. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with either just it falling through or with it being a fall out between the two collaborators?
I've been the fall through. And usually that fall out with the fall through. Typically we tried and we tried again. So it could be something as simple as the time zones aren't meshing. We said that we were going to record at this time. It's not working. You've basically not shown up 3 times, right? That's a time that I have to just consider, like, do they really want to do this? Do I really want to do this with this person? Because you're a no-show. Usually I send an email. I do it's not you, it's me type situation. Basically at this point, our time zones aren't meshing, due to my constraints or whatever, maybe we can do it again. I don't necessarily like closing doors beforehand. Now, fallout, that's something different. I haven't had to deal with it. But if it's a fall through, I kind of just end it in such a way where, I can cite where we're not meshing, because one of the things you never want to do is like straight up blame a person, like straight up blame that other person where they feel some kind of way about you. So it's just best to just kind of like say, well, it's not meshing on both our parts. Maybe we can do it at another date. That's typically what I do with people, because you never know when you might need to collab. Like I might see that person at a pod fest like 2 years from now, and it'll be all smiles. Like, yeah, remember we tried to do that thing? Hey, maybe we could do it right now. Not necessarily, we're not agreeing, but sometimes it's just not working. And you have to figure out, like, place value on your time as well as their time. And then, like we talked about, with collaborative agreement, depending on what we can't agree on, I have to figure out what is my deal breaker and be honest with myself. Don't say yes to something because you don't want to hurt someone's feelings, when at the end of it, I'm going to feel some kind of way. I actually had a collab with someone, and it was about it's called CPTSD. So it's PTSD with people of color. And honestly, after that interview, I felt really, really grimy, like really grimy. It was by a white organization. I felt like it was hyper, like trying to pull like my childhood was so hard because I'm a person of color and I'm suffering from PTSD. I felt really, really grimy after that. And honestly, when I started to feel that way, I had the right to say, you know what, I don't think this is a good fit. So collaborating with someone when it's not working, sometimes it could be that. It could be like you're in the middle of an interview. But you have a right to say, I don't want to be represented this way. I mean, and it's not necessarily so much that it was a white person interviewing, it was the questions and how they were asked, where it's like all Black people have this really hard childhood that manifests to PTSD. I joined the show because as a culture, we have unconscious PTSD to surviving in America, and she never touched on that. So when you're collaborating, vice versa, however it feels, sometimes it's just not a good feel. And if you get that feeling that it's going to be something that you're ashamed of or something that's going to make you feel kind of way, you have the right to say, you know what, I don't think this is working for me. And say it in such a way where you're empowered, but you're also being respectful of that person and tell them why.
Absolutely. Well, I cannot thank you both enough for your time and for joining me with this. You guys have been in the podcast game for a while. You have great content out there. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk with me and to talk with those of us or those of you who are tuning in to tell them more about, collaborating and the benefits of it. Before we get going, though, is there any last points either of you would like to make, your favorite thing about collaborating? Actually, how about we do this? Like, what is your rose and your thorn of collaborating? So tell me your favorite thing and your least favorite thing. Since I put you on the spot, I'll go first. My thorn is definitely scheduling. It is. My thorn is trying to figure out everybody's schedule and putting it together and reaching out and doing the emails and all that. That's my thorn. My rose is I am genuinely curious about people, and I'm fascinated by the way people's minds work. And I love figuring out like how people get to certain points, because like we can have the same thought and have gotten there completely differently with the way that we think. And I just like love anytime I can listen to people like explain why they think a certain way. Even if I don't agree with them, I just want to know why you think that way. So my rose is definitely being able to interact and hear from so many different people. Shamiko, what about you?
We have the same rose. I love to talk to people and learn more about them. So that was the basis of my show and why it fueled me for so long. My thorn would definitely have to be the post-production. I don't like having to promote it. I don't like having to do the show notes. All that stuff takes a lot of time. And I just like to talk. I want to have the conversation. I want people to know the conversation took place, but I don't want to have to do all the things. All the post-production things. It's like I'll have to listen to it 4 times to remember at what minute marker this interesting thing took place, so that people know that this interesting thing took place. I don't like that part.
It's a lot of work. It is. Yeah. What about you, Genie?
Rose is just like you both. Talking to people. I love talking to people. I like getting people's point of views, and their experiences, and expanding on them, because like that's what's the best part of conversating is that I have something to provide, a viewpoint, especially when I'm talking to specialists, that they deal with parents every day, but they never look at their viewpoint, and not realizing that they're talking at them and not collaborating with them. Okay, to piggyback on what we're talking about. My thorn, I have to agree with Shamiko, is the post-production. My thorn with collaboration really is all the things we talked about, I learned the hard way, right? So it's the regret part of collaborating is the only thing I would say was my thorn, but that's something you have to go through so you can help someone else. I always say it's not about you. Like all three of us have been through what we've been through, so that whoever's listening out there, you can benefit from what we're providing right now. But like I said, walking away from a podcast and feeling used, I think that would be my biggest thorn. But with community, I'm understanding that I can walk away. But outside of that, I love collaborating. And just to be clear with everybody, collaborating does not always mean you're looking for a thing, right? If you have a guest, you're collaborating. Parent, a regular person, you are in a collaborative state. So always consider what's not just who you're serving, but also that other person. As soon as you mention or ask them to be on your show, one of the main things I do with people is I highlight how they're awesome. A lot of times people don't see their awesomeness. So the fact that you can see them when they can't see themselves is collaboration 101 from the very beginning. So always think of that when you're reaching out for collaboration. It's not always, I want more listeners. It's not always, I want to sell a thing. It's that connection. Shamiko actually talked about that before. When you're connecting with someone at any point, you never know when they may come back around. You never know when your name is in someone else's mouth. So I would say that is one of my other roses with collaborating, having people on my show. I get pitched all the time. Everybody doesn't make the cut, but the people who do, it was their time.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, again, thank you both so much. Thank you, everybody who's joined and listened. Thank you to Afros and Audio Conference for having us. We're so happy to be able to talk about this and share this with all of you. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference and all of the amazing things that our fellow podcasters share.